talking about a truth and reconciliation matter. Funny thing about truth and reconciliation, as I said before, it begins with truth. Fortunately, in the case of what's been going on lately, it's hard to tell where the truth actually is. Mainly because we're dealing with where oral traditions bump up against what little documentation we have. So let's talk about Musqueam. The current Musqueam settlement and what it means for future treaty negotiations. And why I think that we need to do this in a more legislative framework. So with the new treaty, which guarantees the Musqueam portions of Vancouver as part of their land claim, although it doesn't say that it's ever going to deal with property rights, and everybody says that it won't deal with property rights, it will. From now on, all conventions going forward on properties as they sell, and all covenants will deal with specifically duty to the nation. And it allows for something that's never been allowed before, which is basically taxation by the nation of people who are not members. If they allow property taxes to be divided up and split out, of course, Musqueam Nation will not be supplying any services to those locations. But it is guaranteed that they can actually get taxation from the revenue from the properties. We have a real serious issue, don't we? We end up with, one, increasing the tax load on the people in those properties. If nothing else, the tax load is going to go up, which, of course, as tax loads go up, it decreases affordability and thus increases the never-ending homeless issue. So, what do we really need? Well, how do we really know that the Musqueam Nation was there in those portions of Vancouver? Well, we don't. It's 100% based on oral traditions, and there is, unfortunately, a financial incentive for nations to continue oral traditions which increase their general wealth. I think that when it comes to land claims, we knew roughly how many Musqueam were in the area and on the land based upon early written documentation from the colonists. We need to, in almost all of these cases, look at what the population and nations were like and at when colonists arrived, because it's our only documentation, our only true documentation of how big each nation was, what their traditional culture was like, whether they were hunter-gatherers still or whether they had settled on agricultural. And as a result, we could base all land claims upon what the nation was like when we first observed them. And to do that, we need a legislative framework. We need a legislative framework that says where we can estimate how big your population was based upon those first early records, and we have plenty of archaeological records dealing with that, not just archaeology, but written histories. Sorry, I'm actually going into a store I'd like to tell everybody never to go into, but that's another story. We need to have that structured so that if we can estimate contact or pre-contact populations are worth X number of acres or X number of hectares even per individual at that time, and that all treaties therefore follow that format going forward and cannot include I seem to have really developed a weird flare. That those nations, excuse me while I wipe the lens, those nations therefore will not be able to have their claim that includes current property unless the treaty process, those properties are bought outright by the federal government to transfer over. So private property could never, ever, ever end up in a land claim again. I would be 100% in favor of that. Or if it allowed for negotiations on dollar value for property we cannot turn over because those are now covered under private property, or there just isn't enough free Crown Covenant land available for the treaties in the region that the treaty is being sponsored by, then that X number of dollars would transfer over to the nation immediately. I am 100% in favor of a legislative process for it that sticks all the time and is constantly the blueprint by which all future land claims are settled. Right now, this weird mismatch that we're getting, and with the courts awarding rights that shouldn't be awarded, and the federal government not paying attention to what's going on provincially or even municipal levels, it's just causing a real disaster. And if, in future, that needs to go to court, that legislative framework, we should feel free to use the notwithstanding clause. Now, does that require some negotiations? Yes, obviously. We have to have some negotiations with the existing tribes and nations about what they consider to be, how much land it would take for each of those original nations per person to support their lifestyle. Keep in mind that lifestyle isn't that way anymore. Current lifestyle in the nations is not hunting and gathering to stay alive, and it's not really primitive agriculture. Instead, of course, like everyone else, they've entered the machine age and gone from there. And so, what at contact it would have taken, 3 acres to support this family, now it takes only a fraction to produce the same amount, and the rest of it is actually revenue. So that's where we are on that. But what we need to do is bring back archaeological evidence and physical evidence back into this process. Because right now, relying on everybody's word of mouth on both sides is just not right and is a disaster. Later on, we're going to talk about what went on in some of the residential schools and how the residential school were a total disaster by any sense of the word, and a total nightmare for those nations that had to submit to that process. So we'll talk about that in a future upcoming video. In the meantime, everybody take care, and I really think we really, honest to God, must have legislation, because right now piecemeal is not going to work for anybody. Take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.